Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Really Living. I see some new faces. Welcome. My name is Francis. I'm one of the pastors here at Really Living, and I also want to welcome those of you who are watching us live. This is a new feature that we offer here now, so please don't all just stay home on Sabbath mornings now that we have that. But if you happen to be sick or be away traveling somewhere, you can still see my beautiful face. We are grateful for the weather. Things are starting to change. We are glad that spring is about to spring. No? I'm the only one that's happy about that? Man, you guys are dead today. I'm going to have to wake you up! Well, nothing more exciting to talk about to wake you up than money! I have been in many parts of the world, and I have seen some beautiful landscapes, waterfalls, mountains. I have been to places where some of the architecture is simply breathtaking, temples and buildings, and it never misses that every time I go somewhere that is not North America, and that tends to be a place that's a little bit less fortunate than here, everybody thinks that I'm rich. No matter where I've gone to Togo, I've gone to Laos, I've gone to the Dominican Republic, and everybody thinks that I can sponsor them to come here. Everybody thinks I'm rich. And I tell them, I'm not rich. I have a mortgage to pay. I have taxes to pay. Somebody wave at me. Hey, hi, how are you? It's hard for me to see, but now I see you. Welcome. Glad you could be here. That's okay. It's okay. She can speak up all she wants. Higher cost of living, especially if you live in Toronto. That's why a lot of you move this way. And so I try to help them understand that I'm not rich, but yet they don't buy it. I am rich. Let me ask you the question. Do you think that you're rich? You know, the Gallup pollsters, they asked people making $30,000 to $50,000 what they would have to make in order to be rich. And unequivocally, they all said $100,000. And so, just to be sure, Gallup asked all those who were making $100,000 if they considered themselves to be rich. And of course, they all said, no, we need to be making $200,000 a year. Of course, you know where this is going. Gallup then asked those who are making $200,000 a year, and what did they say? Are you rich? They said, no, we need to be making $500,000. So they went to the 500,000 people, and they asked them, are you rich? What would it take to be rich? And they said, $5 million. So it seems to me like wealth is relative. Or is it? What is rich? Who is rich? And more importantly, are we rich? Well, the Occupy movement had a problem with the 1% for their ill-gotten gains. All over the streets in different parts of the world, they protested against the rich. And here are some statistics that may surprise them and may surprise you. If you are in a household that makes $34,000 a year, combined income, what percentage of the world do you think you're part of as far as wealth? The top 4%. The top 4% of all households in the world, if you make $34,000 a year or more. What about the top 1% of all households? That would mean that you're sharing breathing space with Bill Gates, Madonna, some of those people that we would consider very wealthy. How much money would you have to make a year to be part of the top 1% of household gains? $45,000 a year. To be part of the top 1% in the whole world. To breathe in the exact same air as Bill Gates, who makes $81 billion a year, or to be in the same breathing space as Warren Buffett, who makes about $51 billion a year, you just have to make $45,000 a year. Now, I'm not dumb. I know that the Occupy movement had an issue with the greedy CEOs. CNN came up with a statistic that blew my mind. The top CEOs in Canada, this is amazing. The top CEOs in Canada, by 2 o'clock on January 2nd, made more money than the average household in Canada. So I can understand why they would be a little upset, maybe. So for most people in the world, when it comes to wealth, we're just splitting hairs. We are rich. How rich is rich? Well, at the end of 2012, Canadians broke the 400,000 net worth threshold, up by 5.8% from the previous year. You're kind of looking at yourself and saying, well, is that how much I'm worth? By the end of 2013, that went up to $442,000 and $130,000 a year. The research, this company called Environics, whose job is to figure this fun stuff out, by the end of 2013, the average household in Canada had a total assets of $564,000 with an average debt of $122,000, which brings us to $442,000 a year. That's aside from your debts that have been removed from your total income, total worth, not income, total worth. But Pastor Francis, this is all nice, but I don't feel rich. Every month, I got enough to just pay the bills and a little extra. I don't feel rich. School tuition, got a wedding to pay for, my kids' hockey fees, my property taxes, like $8,000 a year. You should move to Caledonia, it's cheaper. So you may not feel rich, but the statistics show that you are. So maybe Scotiabank is right when they say you're richer than you think. If you buy bottled water when you can drink out of the tap, you're rich. Boy, it got silent all of a sudden. If you have a daily routine, all you coffee drinkers, going through a drive-thru for a medium double at $1.85, when you can brew your own coffee at home for pennies, you're rich. If you have a tool shed or a garage where you store things, a snow blower or a lawnmower or some summer tires, while millions don't even have a living space as big as that, you're rich. if you spend money on a lottery ticket, well, the odds are 25 million to 1. You are rich because you're not going to win. I'm sorry to break it to you this morning. You're rich. And a lot of you said yes when I asked that question. But let me ask you a different question that is much harder. When you read in the Bible verses that talk about rich, do you think it's talking about you? Aha. There's not as many yeses. We often think of the guy next door with a monster house, 4 cars, an indoor and an underground pool, and whatever else that they have, and toys, and we would consider that Bible verse for them. Not for us. You are rich. Therefore, these Bible verses apply to you and me. And if I read these Bible verses to you right now, you might get a little scared. Like this one, for example. Children, how hard it is for them that trust in riches to enter into the kingdom of God. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. Let me rephrase that. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for you to enter the kingdom of heaven. Because you are rich. Doesn't that, I don't know, that sends a little bit of goosebumps for me. Because it looks from this verse that it's not easy to get into heaven for people who are rich. Or a verse like this one, you know this one. No man can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. And it's a lot easier to serve money when you have lots of it, which all of you do. And it says that if you serve one, you can't serve the other. How many of you do not serve your money? How many of us don't serve our money? That's not the verse for the neighbor with the monster house. It's for you and me and them. The reality of these verses are twofold. Wealth is a very strong deterrent to heaven. And you better make sure you don't serve money, because if you do, you despise God. That's not me saying, that's Jesus. So here you have it. You are rich. Everything you own, everything the media tells you you ought to own, or everything that other people own that you would like to own, unless you're very intentional about your walk with God, they own you. And more scary is they own your salvation. Most of us will fall to the world's mindset of wealth, and we don't even know it. We excuse our behavior based on the fact that we may help someone else. We will think that we are serving God, but in reality we are not. So, what's the solution to making sure that we don't fall to riches? Since we're all rich. And I believe the answer is found in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17 to 19. It says, "Command those who are rich in this present age." So I'm going to take it not contextually, but I'm going to take it as if it's speaking to you and me, Rena. Right? In this present age, command those who are rich in this present age not to be arrogant, nor to trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God, who gives us richly all things to enjoy. What are uncertain riches? Anybody? Money, your job, RSPs, your house. Some of you experienced the crash of the market where your house went from certain value to almost nothing. The bank didn't even want it because it was worthless. Everything that we consider valuable on this earth is uncertain. And not only to that extent, but at the end of time, none of it you're going to take with you. And so, if you take a deep look at yourself, and if you start to analyze your life and how money manages your life, manages the decisions you make, or manages the decisions you don't make, I think the two verses we just read are incredibly serious for us. What's even more interesting about this verse is that everything that you have, that you call yours, is actually God's. It says, "Who gave us richly all things to enjoy." The gifts you have, the degree you've acquired, the new house. I saw some pictures of people on Facebook with new, sold sign, and they got new house. And now, it's not, the verse doesn't say you shouldn't have riches. The Bible says you shouldn't trust in them. Right? That's what it says. You don't trust in them. But how many of us are good when we have a certain amount of money? When I was a kid, I remember one time I found, I think it was a total of about $2.55 in coins on the ground. I hit the mother load. I was like, wow. Now my first thought was to put it in the bank, right? I went to the corner store and I bought candy till there was no money left. No money left. Mom and Dad don't even know about that. They're here now, so you're going to find out things about me. It was in a schoolyard somewhere, and it was money, and I found it, and so we went out and we just, instinctively, we just think of the things we can get when we have money. Not so much how many people we can help. You following me? Maybe I'm just speaking for myself. That's definitely me. The Bible doesn't say to have them. It says not to trust them. But here's the harsh reality of this verse that is so hard for us to accept. Everything you have because of God, whether you believe in God or not. That's the bottom line. And until we come to reality with that, we will hold on to the things we have because you think we worked hard for them. Check this out. I love this quote. This is from a book called Looney by John Van Duzer. And in page 23 it says, "The same you, the same hard work, the same intelligence, born in another country or in another time or in another family will not produce the same results." When I went to Laos, I walked around the streets and I'm looking at God and saying, why was I born in Canada? I could have been born anywhere else. And then what do I do with that privilege now? You have very little to do with it. Not your wit, not your muscles, not your ingenuity. It's God. And unless and until you accept and admit this, you will continue to think that the things that you have belong to you, and you will continue to tie your security in the hands of wealth instead of in the hands of God. You don't think that you think this way. Your children do. They haven't worked a day in their life. But that toy, don't get it out of their hands. That's my toy. My toy. My daddy bought it for me at Christmas. And sometimes we're just like children. We just don't say it as loud as they do. We just say, next week. I remember my dad, and he's here now, and we've been talking. You know, one day there was a couple who got married, and he lent them his new car. He lent them his new car to drive to the wedding. New car. Come on. Come on, how many of you would do that? New car. Just off the lot 2 weeks earlier. The reality is that wealth can be a trap. A dangerous trap that most of us cannot control. Go with me to the book of Deuteronomy. I find this incredibly interesting. The book of Deuteronomy, no, I don't have it on the screen, so you have to look it up. Sometimes we just have to look it up. Deuteronomy chapter 8. Deuteronomy chapter 8 has an interesting component here. This is Moses talking to Israel before they take over the promised land. I find this advice incredibly, incredibly good. And I think it's an advice that's for us. It starts in verse 11. It says, "Beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping His commandments, His judgments, and His statutes, which I command you today. Lest when you have eaten and are full, and have built beautiful houses and dwelt in them, and when your herds and your flocks multiply, and your silver and your gold are multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, when your heart is lifted up, and you forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage, who led you through the great and terrible wilderness, in which were fiery serpents and scorpions, and thirsty land where there was no water, who brought water for you out of the flinty rock, who fed you in the wilderness with manna, with your fathers, which your fathers did not know, that He might humble you, and that He might test you, to do you good in the end. Then you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gained me this wealth." It's hard to accept this message. This is why he's crying. It's hurtful to hear this stuff. I'm surprised not more of you are crying right now. I'm serious. I read this stuff and I prepared this sermon, and I'm like, what is wrong with me? In comparison to other parts of our world, I would consider Canada to be the promised land. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of immigrants who feel that way. Of course, when they get here, it's a little bit harsher reality than what they thought sometimes. But nonetheless, there's opportunity. There's safety. There's rules and regulations that we try to keep to the best of our ability. Don't get to the place in your life, in the promised land, where you think that you got here because of you. Because if that's the way you think, then you will forget the Lord your God. God warns about wealth because He knows what it does, even though He's the one that allows it to happen. So what's the solution? Because I know you want the solution. How can you get released from that trap? Because whether you want to admit it or not, you're most likely trapped in it. Well, we go back to Timothy. And we go to Timothy, 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 18. Then you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gained me this wealth. No, this is not it. Right here. Let them do good, that they may be rich in good works, ready to give, willing to share, storing up for themselves a good foundation for the second coming of Jesus, that they may hold on to eternal life. Now, I recognize that there are some people here today who are not Seventh-day Adventists. Perhaps some of you are Christians from other denominations, or perhaps some of you are not Christians at all. Perhaps some of the people who are listening online. And I know that the overall feeling of people out in the world when it comes to churches is that they just want your money. And I think that if you look online and you start watching some videos about pastors of certain churches, you will become very disgusted very quickly as to what some churches have done with money. And I understand that some of you may doubt the integrity of churches when it comes to your hard-earned money. Well, it's really not your hard-earned money anymore. We've admitted that it's God's. So, God's money that He lent to you. And there's a level of distrust in the world today when it comes to churches. And rightfully so. But at the end of the day, it's not your money. It's not your money. And what people do with the money you give, that money no longer belongs to you. This is why the Seventh-day Adventist Church are denominationalists, not congregationalists. Whoa, that's a lot of point for Scrabble. What does it mean? Just shortly said, congregationalists are denominations where the money stays in the church. All the money you give, most of it stays in the church. Whereas denominationalists, the money goes to the headquarters, the denomination, where then they dish out the monies in ways that are, in my opinion, held to a higher scrutiny. For example, in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, any pastor who has been working for 10 years or more in our country all gets paid the same salary. No matter how big, how small, how troublesome the church is, they all get paid the same amount of money. I cannot choose a big church and go there because I'm going to make more money. It doesn't work that way. As a matter of fact, that's what we call tithe, right? In the Bible, when the Bible talks about tithe, which means tenth, so a 10% of your income, that money comes to the church here, and when you give the 10% to your church here of your income, none of that money helps this church. Zero. It all goes to the head office, and then they pay their pastors all the same salary. A lot of that money goes to the world church. Churches in different parts of the world that can't afford to do what we do. Some of the money pays for administration, of which, by the way, the administrators who work at the conference and at the union, they may make 5% more than me after 10 years of service. So we're not in it for the money. The money that you give in the Seventh-day Adventist Church is managed to help the world. And everybody who works for the church, some people say we have to work sacrificially, but I think I'm paid just fine. The Lord has blessed Tina and I just fine. We are in need of nothing except a new car. But we can pay for it. Last year, you gave $300,000 in tithe. That was $150,000 for Benton and $150,000 for me. No, you haven't learned anything. I just said it doesn't stay here. Right? All that money goes to the head office. And all the churches, $32 million was given to the Ontario Conference last year in tithe alone. One of the highest in the country. Nothing in comparison to the States. But here, one of the highest. And that money is then managed by these stewards to help further the work of God here, in other provinces, and in the world. By the end of the year, the work of God has gone further because of the money you've given in tithe. But then somebody's going to say, Pastor Francis, how do we turn on the lights in this church? Well, that's the other 10% that you give in offerings. My mom and dad taught me since a young age that we give 20% of our income to God. 10% in tithe, 10% in offerings. To this day, I have always done that. And I am in need of nothing. As a matter of fact, when you take 20% out of my salary, I'm still in the top 1%. Tina and I's combined salary was still in the top 1%. See, the problem is not that we don't have enough money. The problem is we don't have enough wisdom on how to spend it. I haven't paid. That's not true. I haven't paid a cent of interest on my credit card ever in my life. I'm paying interest on my house because I can't afford that. So there's certain things that you have to, and you have to be wise about it. But I have never paid a cent of interest on my credit card. Why? Because of how my dad raised me. He taught me to be wise with money. My mom and dad, not just dad, mom and dad. So, again, I asked a question earlier. What is the solution? I just gave it to you. Give to God what belongs to God. Give to the church what belongs to the church. You can live with 80% and you will become a better steward of what God has given you. That's God's solution. As a matter of fact, the Seventh-day Adventist Church follows the Old Testament model. The 10% you give allows your pastors to live and to better shepherd you. And then whatever you give to the church allows for the programs for your children that you love and come to this church for. I've asked a lot of people who are transferring their membership here. I said, why do you want to come here? Because we love the programs you have for the kids. So that doesn't come for free. All that stuff comes with you giving of sacrificially so that these things can happen, not just for your children, because our mission in this church is to embrace our community with the Adventist message of hope and wholeness. So we want to do it for children in the community too. That's why right now we have anywhere between 3 to 4 children from the community who are in our Really Living Kids program. Tonight there'll be some community people who will come to rock climb and play volleyball with us. Our classes are full of people from the community. We charge them a minimal rate. We make no money. We just try to at least recover some of our costs. We do it because we want to build relationships and ultimately give them salvation. That's why we exist. That's why Really Living is here. And I'm sorry to say it, it doesn't happen without money. Your money. Oh no, hold on. God's money. I mean, our mission statement, you know it. You know it by heart, right? Right, James? Where's James? He's not here. Oh, there he is. Embracing our community with the Adventist message of hope and wholeness. When you give offerings to this church, it fulfills this, which fulfills 1 Timothy 6, verse 18. Doing good, sharing, willing to share, doing good works. So, in essence, what I'm trying to tell you is to solve the problem of wealth is to give and to share and to do good works. And if you have a lot of money and a lot of toys, you don't have time to do good works. You're too busy. You may not be counting your wealth, but you may be polishing it, or you may be protecting it, or you may be thinking about it. You may be managing it. And it takes time. I asked somebody one day, I said, are you willing to help the poor? Oh, yeah. I said, so you just bought a $700,000 house, and when they asked you to upgrade the countertop from laminate to granite, they told you just be $2,500 more. What's $2,500 in $700,000? It's nothing. I said, take that $2,500 and give it to a poor person on the street. Oh, it's too much. What? It's not too much to have a granite countertop, but it's too much to help someone in need? You see, we don't understand. We think that we are managing our wealth well, but we are not. When it comes to upgrading your car with Sirius radio or spoiler or whatever, you don't need it, but somebody else does. I'm not saying to get a horse and buggy and go to Mohawk every day. That's not what I'm saying. Don't misinterpret what I'm saying. Is that a lot of times, because it's a larger amount, we will just allow to add a smaller amount to it because in the big picture it doesn't. But what if you were willing to give that small amount? Then it becomes a really big amount. You understand what I'm saying, right? We have a philosophy here of getting you off the pew and serving people outside the church with your time and with your money. We want to teach, help, uplift those who have a sense of need, and our programs are geared to that goal, all of them. So when you give your 10% of offering to this church, you know it will be used to bring hope and wholeness to people around us, just like 1 Timothy 6, verse 18. And fulfilling the mission that we have here as a church. You never thought of it that way, maybe. But I want to close with this thought. It says, storing up for yourselves a good foundation for the time to come. What does that mean, the time to come? What time? What time? The second coming of Jesus. Giving now prepares you for the second coming of Jesus. You know why? Because the foundational principle of God is to give. That's why He gave His Son. Therefore, if you don't give, you lose your salvation. That's how far it gets, because it says you may lay hold on to eternal life. Keep your money, lose heaven. Keep your time, lose heaven. Keep your position, lose heaven. Give it up, keep heaven. I had somebody ask me to do something this week for them. And I said, sure, I'll do it. And then they call me back later and says, oh, I don't need you to do it anymore because, somebody else has stepped up to do it. Great. But I felt good that I didn't have to do it anymore. But I felt good that I said yes. No, it's one thing to say that we want to help the poor. It's another to do it. Sometimes the most valuable thing that you should give is your time. Giving is the foundation of the kingdom of God. Jesus gave His life in order for salvation to be given to all mankind. The foundational truth about salvation is that it is free because someone else sacrificed. And the normal Christian heartfelt reaction to this salvation is to do the same. When you give, you are investing in the gospel. Sometimes to preach it is not as important as just living it. This is why Satan has done such a good job at pushing people away from churches due to finances. When we give money to the church, to the poor, to charities, and to nonprofits, we are giving away God's money, not yours. And you are trusting Him that He will allow you to continue to live with the rest. And trust me, you can do it. You can do it. Try me, He says, and see if I will not open up the heavens to pour blessings upon you. And a lot of times those blessings is not more money, it's peace. Understanding that you trust in God before you trust in your money. That relationship is foundational to you understanding salvation. This is why giving is so important. Don't be consumed by consumption, and don't be possessed by possessions. You don't lean to learn how to get rich. You are rich. Put down the books and open up the newspaper and see who needs help in your community. I'd like to challenge you. This just came to my mind, so it can't be from me. It's not on my paper. I'd like to challenge us this month. Take 1% of your monthly earnings and give them to someone who needs help. 1% of your monthly earnings. So if you make $1,000 this month, you would give how much to someone? How much? $10. $10. If you make $5,000 this month, you will give $50 to someone. And ask God to lead you to that person. 1% of this month's earning. 1%. Come on, sermons have to be practical, right? We got to put our money where our mouth is. 1% of this month's earnings, give it to someone else who needs help. A fable is told that once upon a time there was a very rich businessman who was near his death. Having worked hard all of his life, he desperately wanted to be able to take some of his wealth with him to heaven. And so, for reasons only known to God, remember this is a fable, right? It's not true. I'm trying to make a point here. For reasons only known to God, God gave him special permission to bring only one suitcase. One. So he goes to Value Village and he finds the biggest suitcase he can find, brings it home, and he filled it with his most valuable possessions, and he placed it with him in his tomb when he passed away. It's a fable, remember? On resurrection morning, he gets out from the tomb and he grabs his suitcase and he gets to the pearly gates where Peter stops him and says, "What are you doing here with the suitcase?" And he says, "God allowed me. I can come here with the suitcase." And so Peter picks up his phone, calls God and says, "God, Did you give this guy permission to bring in a suitcase? God says, yeah, he's good. Just make sure you check it before he comes in. And so Peter says, sure enough, God has given you permission to come in with this one suitcase, but I have to open it and check its content first. And so the man says, sure, no problem. Pulls down the suitcase, opens up the zipper, opens up the suitcase. The man had filled it full with ingots of gold. And Peter looked at it and says, you brought pavement? The things that you value are of no value to God. So start valuing the things that matter to Him, which is doing good works, which is sharing, which is giving, which is building a foundation of your salvation. You want to know the solution to wealth? Give. Man, every time we open up your word, it teaches us things that impact our life forever. Today we learned that a very experienced evangelist told a young man by the name of Timothy that he needs to teach his people that we need to be giving people. People who will share. People who are willing to just give of the things that they need, not just the things that they want. Father, we recognize today that this has a strong impact on our salvation. And we also recognize that, Lord, that we are not giving people. Even though we may be giving, maybe we're just giving of what we have, of the extra we have. But Lord, you want us to give more. So let it be to your glory and to your glory alone, so that we can build a strong foundation for our salvation and be ready for the time to come. Father in heaven, you have blessed this church with so many things. And now we want to give back. We want to give back by bringing people to your kingdom. That's the only reward we want. That's all we want. So help us to do that well. In your name I pray.